there would have been support and there would have been a chance to topple Hitler. I mean, Hitler in his first phase of rule was not a strong dictator, and so there would have been a chance, but the trade unions missed it, partly because they thought, against the backdrop of unemployment, workers would not be. It would be hard to mobilize people.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 185 for the 13th of February 2026.
In my opinion, I have very strong opinions on housing. That's what I did for a long time. I did good with it. But, we got to get interest rates.
This piece is not about Trump. I promise.
In my opinion, I have very strong opinions on housing. That's what I did for a long time. I did good with it. But, we got to get interest rates.
This isn't a piece about Trump.
To me, the biggest factor is interest rates for housing. Yes, only in that...
Well, just a tiny bit, but really, it's hardly about Trump at all. In fact, forget about Trump altogether for a bit. Think about economists. Economists and public policy people. When they're discussing policy proposals, different things that government might or might not do, one concept that they have is about how distributed the costs and benefits of a particular policy might be. Of course, they look at the pros and cons of any given policy, but they also look at who gets the pros and the cons, and in particular, whether the pros and cons are highly distributed, like I said, or highly concentrated. The reason that they do this is because they know that studying any given proposal is all well and good, but it doesn't really mean much if you can't put it into force. And they've noticed over the years that policies that get accepted are not always the ones where the pros outweigh the cons by the most, or even outweigh them at all. The reason is this. People, voters, care more about things that affect them a lot. Something that affects them a lot will possibly shift their vote, and politicians know this and react to it. Something that has only a small, marginal effect on their lives, not so much. So when the benefits of a policy are highly concentrated on a few people, they'll campaign hard to get it or keep it. And when the costs are highly distributed, the total cost might far outweigh the total benefits. But if that cost is thinly spread across a large number of people, none of those people are motivated enough to fight against it or even reconsider their vote based on it. And the reverse can be true as well. A clear example of this was the campaign in Donegal for the taxpayer to foot the entire bill for the rebuilding of homes built with mica and other damaging materials in the rocks. That's the definition of a highly concentrated interest. So highly concentrated that they got a TD elected, Charlie Ward, for the 100% redress party. They want the taxpayer to pay the bill because, to be fair to them, I'd suppose that they didn't expect much luck sending the bill to the quarries who supplied the defective product, or the corrupt Fianna Fáil minister who scrapped the inspection scheme which would have avoided the disaster. The cost of that redress is, of course, spread across all of the taxpayers in the country, and I suppose the fact that we didn't have any 0% redress TDs elected anywhere else shows that it's spread thinly enough not to move people's votes in the opposite direction. But of course, with enough special pleading from enough groups with their paws out, that cost mounts up. Now, cost and benefit here don't always just refer to money. All sorts of policies have winners and losers, and the relative concentration of the winning and losing can have a far bigger effect on the policy than the total cost or benefit. We learned last month that the rollout of automatic red light cameras at junctions in Dublin has been put on hold while the Department of Transport, quote, considers a new national strategy for the expanded use of safety cameras. It doesn't take a genius to work out that the government here, not to mention the Gardaí, are reluctant to face the wrath of drivers who get a fine and penalty points for running a red light. Most of the offences here happen when cars stop somewhere in the region of a red light. One car behind the stop line, another car in front of it on the advanced cycle stop area, another car in front of that on the pedestrian crossing, and another one probably sticking out into the junction. The typical Garda reaction is, sure, at least your man stopped. But of course the real consideration here is that neither politicians nor Gardaí want to deal with the wrath of a motorist outraged that they are expected to obey the law. They have no concern about the person trying to push a pram between the bumpers and the fumes of the cars who stopped, but only just, and are blocking the crossing. Those politicians and Gardaí calculate that the highly concentrated wrath of the motorist is likely to be more hassle to them than the highly distributed inconvenience to the pedestrians. The result of this is that we must have our entire road network built around non-compliance with basic rules of the road. Unlike almost every other country, Ireland does not have a red-orange phase on traffic lights to tell drivers to get in gear and be ready to start, because we know that drivers would count it as a go signal and blast straight through it. We also have longer downtime in traffic lights where all the roads are signalled red to stop, because many Irish drivers think that the rule is green means go, orange means go, and red means 3 more cars. I'm sure that many drivers would be outraged if they got penalty points for following that rule. There's your highly concentrated cost. But the benefit that would allow all of us to get around faster is highly distributed. So even though that benefit is much greater than the cost, it's not big enough for any individual to persuade them to do anything about it. This pattern happens all over Irish public life, but sometimes it's harder to see. One issue that you'd think would create a huge, active lobby group suffering from a highly concentrated problem is the housing crisis. People who can't get on the housing ladder, or people who can't get housing at all, surely they're motivated to move mountains, let alone move votes, to get their problem solved. You'd think. And that's where Donald Trump comes to our aid.
You know, you have a lot of people that have become wealthy in the last year because their house value has gone up.
But this isn't about Trump at all, really, I promise. Well, it's only about Trump in that he often says the quiet bit out loud, like this.
You know, when you get the housing, when you make it too easy and too cheap to buy houses, those values come down. I don't want those values to come down. We have millions of people that own houses, and for the first time in their life, they're wealthy because the house is worth $500,000 or $600,000 or more or less, but more money than it's ever been worth before. I don't want to do anything to knock that down, and so I want to be very careful with this. You know, you make housing, I can turn on housing immediately, but you make it too easy and you're going to knock the value down of people that own houses. I want to, for those people, those millions of people that own houses, we're going to drive those values up, but we're also going to try making it easier for people to buy. The best thing that can happen for both.
Politicians might not like to admit it, but they're keenly aware that there are a lot of people out there who are quite happy about stratospheric house prices. And the people with houses easily outnumber the people without them. And they're more likely to vote, or even be able to vote, given how difficult our electoral roll makes things for people moving regularly between rental accommodation. But hang on, what about the whole thing of distributed and concentrated? For most people, most voters, regardless of whether their house price goes up or down, their house is still worth exactly one house. Their value from living in it doesn't change at all. Even if they're avid Daily Mail readers who like to snobbishly think how much their house is worth, surely that still counts as a much more distributed benefit than the highly concentrated cost on the people whose whole lives are disrupted by not being able to get adequate housing. You'd think. But then again, there are some people who have far more property than just their house. property prices for them are much more than a theoretical number. And those are certainly the sort of people who can and do bend the ear of politicians and try to make sure that they go easy on any measures that would actually work at reducing the cost of housing, be they in Ireland or the US or anywhere else. So Trump might be good at seeming like he says the quiet bit out loud in an effort to recruit the lucky ones who have a home of their own into supporting him. But maybe that's not exactly what he's doing. Maybe in the US, like in Ireland, there are other people who aren't so anxious to be campaigning in public, but still push government policy to suit their own highly concentrated interests. In a moment, we'll have the interview, but first I want to say thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. We really appreciate everyone who donates there. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it. It's not in this big league like some Irish podcasters that I could mention, but it pays for the web hosting and maybe the phone bills, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. And it's a great morale boost also when we get a new patron. It lets us know that there's people out there who appreciate the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media. You're more than welcome to listen for free. But if you think that you could do the same as those donors and throw in the price of a cup of coffee once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
On the line, I've got two guests. From Germany, I'm joined by Arnd Bauerkämper, who is the adjunct professor of modern history at the Freie Universität in Berlin. And he has a list of publications that is too long for me to list and too German for me to pronounce. But he's a distinguished historian, and he has particularly studied the period during which the Nazis rose to power in Germany. And last year he published a paper called Fascism and the Lure of Populist Autocracy, Past and Present. On the other side of the Atlantic, you could say that most talk radio in the US leans to the right, or it might be more accurate to say that it's almost toppling over to the right. But one exception to that rule is Joan Esposito, who is the afternoon drive time presenter on WCPT, which bills itself as Chicago's progressive talk radio, which would position it well to the left of the American political spectrum. I have to say I had a bit of a time zone challenge getting everyone on the line for this discussion. As we record, it's about 20 past 4, 16:20 in Ireland and about 17:20 in Germany. And Joan, in the US, it feels like about 1932. Is that right?
It's early. Let's just put it that way. It's early.
Sure, you might have missed my joke in the sense of 1932, in the sense of repeating the politics of almost 100 years ago in Europe. What is happening in the US?
We have a country that is unrecognizable to most of us right now.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump in his first term was restrained by the system, by the fact that he appointed people with actual experience to work with him in his cabinet, and they restrained him. He learned from that.
Mm-hmm.
His cabinet is filled with people who just say yes to him. And he has learned that there is no ethic, there is no norm, there is no value, there is no law that he cannot defy. And he has, so far, he has not defied openly the courts, but we feel it's only a matter of time. And the most egregious example, I think, of our descent into fascism is what has been happening with our ICE agents who are supposed to be going around the country finding undocumented people who've committed crimes to deport them. But it has turned into just a war. I mean, almost
give
a
us
quarter of the people.
For people maybe who are not so up to the news on that, give me some examples of what's happening.
Well, let's take a look at Minneapolis. In the last couple of weeks, we have had 2 peaceful protesting citizens shot, murdered by ICE agents. A woman said to an ICE agent as she was driving away, "I'm not mad at you." He then shot her in the face 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
A nurse a woman was pushed down at a demonstration in the last few days, and a nurse went over to take care of her. He had a legal gun that he was wearing, not holding. Agents pushed him down. They took his gun, they walked away, and then they shot him in the back as he was trying to help her. It was plain murder. And after that, a lot of the rest of the agents stood back, and 2 ICE agents, after the man was already down, emptied their guns into his body. Mm-hmm. It was a public execution, and ICE agents, to me right now, are acting like some sort of Gestapo. They truly are.
Okay, one question I have about that, and those 2 incidents are very disturbing, and there have been other things and other examples, not necessarily with violence on the streets, that are very disturbing. But I guess where I want to ask you, Arnd, is about the quantum. From what you know of what's happening in the US and from your study of German history, it's easy to make, obviously, comparisons, but I'm wondering, how valid is it? Because it's quite easy to pick out from any government, I guess, some at least trivial thing that they have in common with the Nazis. In taking the situation as a whole, what's your opinion?
Well, as a German, I firstly would like to say, the United States has been a model for us, a model of democracy, 1945. And against the backdrop of this experience, this positive experience of a vibrant democracy in the US, recent changes are, of course, very concerning and worrying. And I see 2 points. I do see the United States on the way to a populist authoritarian rule and regime. And there are 2 or 3 really worrying trends. First is a tendency to undermine the rule of law. I think it still exists. There's a pushback. The judiciary is still powerful. There's some pushback. So I've not lost hope on this. And second is this kind of tendency to go to war, Greenland, But again, there were some Republicans in the Congress, as well as the economy, the stock exchange, that ultimately prevented Trump from going to war over Greenland. And third, I think, this kind of paramilitary violence in the streets of Minneapolis, it resembles to some extent paramilitary squads in Germany in the early 1930s. But again, according to the most recent news, Trump has ordered to retreat, at least to some extent, from Minneapolis. So I still see a very strong tendency towards an authoritarian rule, authoritarian populist rule, ruling in the name of the people as an entity. What is people, of course? But I still see some barriers and pushbacks in the United States. So I have not completely lost hope, despite some similarities, or let's call it analogies, to the situation in Germany in the early 1930s.
Okay, but specifically,
so there's still time to push back.
Okay, to specifically make a comparison, Hitler was elected chancellor, I think, in very early 1933, at the end of 1932. Within a few months, Hindenburg died, and he was effectively took over the powers of the role of president as well. So there was no control from that point of view on Hitler. And also within a few months, there was the Enabling Act. And with that, there was an absolutely totalitarian society. There was a referendum in which about 90% of people, obviously not in a democratic vote, but 90%, the result was about 90% of the votes endorsed making Hitler a dictator. That situation is not analogous to what's happening in the US. Would you agree, Joan?
I think what you two have just spoken about is the one thing that gives me so much hope, because I've been forced to become somewhat of a student of the lead up to World War II. mostly by talking to people who are a lot more experienced than I am, like you aren't. And that is, I think, what gives me hope is the light at the end of the tunnel. The fact that people are not acquiescing. After the first shooting, I think those in charge of the ICE agents thought everyone would be cowed, they'd be afraid, they would stop demonstrating, and they did not. So, if you were going to go after a state to try to make an example of them, Minnesota was a bad choice. Minnesotans are very much like Canadians. There's this phrase, Minnesota nice. And I don't think Minnesota nice means Minnesota weak. I mean, these were not people, they are not people to mess with. And exactly what you said is what gives me hope. Each time I think this is it looks really bad, the people rise up. I think we waited for a while. We thought our elected leaders would step into the fray.
Are you sure about that, Joan? Joan, are you sure about that? Because Trump's approval rating is not great. But if you look at just the generic polling for the midterm elections in November, the Democrats are ahead by a couple of points. The people who are opposed to Trump might be more strongly opposed to him, but there isn't any sense that there's a huge movement in society against him of people who previously were the middle ground, which is small enough, or supporters of Trump turning against him.
I would say the middle ground is exactly what he's lost. There was polling done in the last week. A lot of people who always considered themselves Republican but couldn't quite stomach Trump, they became independents. Independents are now a huge voting bloc in our elections. A poll was just done. 70% of independents do not approve of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. One of his own senators.
But I'm looking at it here. The race for Congress 2026. The Democrats are +4.
I would say to you, I don't think that's accurate. I think that the Democrats can't sit back and just expect victory to fall in their lap. But I think this country is primed for a rebuke of the Republican Party, at the very least in the Congress. But things have gotten so out of control. If the Republicans don't find a way to pull this back, they have a chance of losing the Senate as well. And I know that from conversations that have been reported, they're terrified. They're afraid the midterms are going to be, as in the words of Ted Cruz, a bloodbath.
Okay. Arnd, on that specifically, you'll be very aware of the referendum that happened, essentially endorsing the Enabling Act in Germany. I was looking at the results of that. So something in around 90% of the votes allegedly were in favor of Hitler, but it was not unanimous. Some places like Hamburg had as high as 20% of votes against that, and that was in the face of large-scale intimidation and very undemocratic practices in polling places where people had to go and expose themselves if they were going to be voting against that in some cases. If you were to have a guess, and this is, I guess, a difficult thing to ask a historian, about what would have been the result of a truly democratic referendum at that time?
Well, that's hard to say because it's counterfactual history, of course.
But the result, the reason I'm asking, I should clarify, is because the result did somewhat mirror what you would expect. So, for example, strongly communist areas of Berlin, like Wedding, had a much higher, but still small, like 20% vote against. I think Hamburg also had a strong vote against. So it did seem to mirror reality, even if it was a sort of a distorted mirror. But I will allow you to answer the question the second time I repeat it. What would you have expected a democratic result to be?
Yeah, the Nazis did not really succeed in abolishing all the, if you like, political differences in political attitudes within a few months, of course, and these polls or whatever these views are. I mean, they mirror the differences, milieus, if you like, political milieu in Germany. So differences did exist, particularly in the first few months of the Nazi rule. But this, your reference to the referendum raises two important problems, I think. First, referenda are to some extent problematic because they reduce democracy to elections. Mm-hmm. Elections are important, votes are important for democracies, but a liberal democracy also includes protection of minorities and the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
If you abolish the rule of law, if you no longer protect minorities, it's no longer a liberal democracy. So referenda are important and can mirror opinions, but this is not really truly a liberal representative democracy.
Sure,
So
especially if you're writing the question.
Yes, yes.
But I'm going to make your second point and then I'll follow up.
The question is important and the circumstances are important. I mean, if you have a referendum in an atmosphere of repression, I mean, it does not say a lot. It doesn't tell you a lot. And the second point is authoritarianism. I mean, the Weimar Republic had no longer been a viable democracy for the last 3 years of its existence. I mean, it had been hollowed out since 1930. And so this is a difference, I think, to the United States, despite the tendency to give the president stronger executive powers arguably since Reagan. I mean, kind of imperial presidency, starting with President Bush at the latest, giving the president strong executive powers can be a dangerous tendency.
Mm-hmm. But I'm going to insist on, even if it is unscientific, I'm going to insist on you answering my question, because in the 1930 general election, the Social Democrats got 30% of the vote. The Communists got more than 10% of the vote. They would have been expected to be powerfully against the Nazis, and the Christian Democrats perhaps not as strongly so, but also. And I'm wondering, is it true that there were mass defections? Were there genuine mass defections away from those anti-Nazi parties to support the Nazi? Or give me, I accept that it is a flawed question, but give me an idea of what you think a true representative vote in that referendum would have, minus the intimidation and the vote rigging, would have been.
I think under the circumstances of the first phase of the Nazi dictatorship, the Nazis had more or less all powers, and they controlled all important agencies of political rule, institutions of political rule. I'm pretty sure that the majority of the Germans would have voted for Hitler in these circumstances, of course. And let's not forget, it's a yes or no vote. Yeah? So it doesn't leave any room for differentiation. So I think in the first phase in 1933, 1934, there was strong support for the Nazis, even though, if you look at the last election in the Weimar Republic of November 1932, the Nazis had lost votes compared to the preceding election, the previous election of July 1932. So you cannot fully convincingly claim that the Nazis had been voted into office. And if you look at the succession of events from 1930 to 1933, the Nazi seizure of power was not inevitable. It could have prevented almost up to the last moment. Almost up to the 30th of January 1933. So it's not inevitable. What it tells us is it's up to us. We have to fight back and have to prevent it. And human agency is very important. It's not inevitable.
Joan, in that case, I want to put a question to you. You're probably aware, and this shows up very frequently online, Lawrence Britt wrote an article about the 14 signs of fascism, and this has things like nationalism, militarism, sexism, disdain for human rights, control of the mass media. But the thing about that list, which is very often, I think, referred to by people on the left, especially in the US, is that there is no quantum in any of those. And the reality is, in every country, you will find some degree of nationalism, militarism, sexism, and so forth. How do you find, or how do you know whether or not you have ticked one of those 14 boxes? And how do you know you are in a position whereby you can say you are in an absolutely emergency situation where democracy is failing?
I think for me, like you said, in all countries, you can find examples of that. But we now have a government that is sort of enshrining some of those ideas in their actions and in what they are trying to do with their rule. For instance, attack on women and minorities. One of the first things our new Secretary of Defense did was purge a lot of the top leaders, most of which happen to be women and people of color. They're scrubbing any historical references to the achievements in the military of women and people of color. It is
but Joan, isn't there a danger of catastrophism here? Because, for example, we see on the point of revolution, perhaps somewhere like Iran, where you have an unquestionably brutal fascist theocratic regime murdering literally thousands of people in the streets. Are you sure that it adds to the debate when, even if, as seems to be the case, you say unarguably 2 people have been murdered in Minneapolis by ICE? That's not the same thing. And isn't it true that when you say it is the same thing, that's true? That's true.
We have a different history here.
Yes.
We are not Iran. Iran has a history over and over again of this kind of violence. We do not. For us, this is breaking norms. This is creating a world that we thought would never exist in this country. And I think the government purge of the minorities and the women from the military is catastrophic. We have never been who we are now, and we don't like it. And gives me a lot of hope, because I think what we are seeing is people rising up and people trying to stop it wherever they can. I mean, for months, I've been telling my audience, don't wait for someone to come save you. We are going to save ourselves. And I think that you can't compare a country that has a religious government and has a long history of repression and violence. That is not who we've been. As Arnd said, we've been a moral and ethical leader for the rest of the world.
Sure, and but two murders don't make a theocratic fascist state. I'm sure you would agree.
Exactly.
Okay.
I absolutely.
Okay, so my I guess maybe I can ask Arnd to help you out. If you were to say that, what is the threshold? What is the point at which you are in an emergency situation that justifies extraordinary reactions? What would that be, Arnd?
When the rule of law does no longer work, when there's no longer an independent judiciary.
But all of those are true to a degree in the US already.
Yeah,
the Supreme Court is deeply compromised. The rule of law in terms of, there's no question that the Trump family is taking billions in bribes and improper payments, and also pardoning a great many people who are simply paying large amounts of money to Trump.
Okay, yeah, I do agree. I mean, and all what Joan has been saying is deeply concerning. There is a trend towards a kind of authoritarian populist regime. This is certainly true, even though it's not yet, or will hopefully never be a kind of full-fledged dictatorship like the one in Iran. But it's a dangerous tendency. It's a slippery slope, of course. And I see that the judiciary has been weakened, but it is still working to some extent. And
yes, it is.
It's a matter of degree, and we still have protection of minorities, even though, as I said, these trends, ignoring human rights, giving amnesty to convicted criminals. I mean, think of the 6th of January 2021.
Yep.
These are dangerous, of course, dangerous trends, and they're giving dangerous messages to some people. I mean, if you can expect to be to receive an amnesty for for crimes, I mean, this is deeply concerning. But still, I don't think that the United States has reached the threshold. But it's up to us. Well, not up to the Germans, of course.
Sure. But as a historian, you're entitled to comment.
I agree completely.
That's up to the Americans.
Go ahead, Joe.
I do think while the judiciary certainly has not been as reliable as we might hope, even at the Supreme Court level, there have been some decisions to check Trump and check power. And they're supposed to be ruling on his tariffs. And from the questioning that they did with the lawyers, there's every indication that they might say he doesn't have the power, which he doesn't, to impose tariffs. So I think that, yes, would I have liked the judiciary to be stronger? Absolutely. But the lower court and middle court and appellate courts are ruling against Trump every single day.
A question which I'll put to both of you, maybe Joan, well, maybe let's go to Arnd first. Is there any stage in a theoretical fascist takeover, let's not particularize it, is there any stage at which violence or extra-legal action is justified to stop that takeover?
That's a very hard question. I mean, if yeah, I know. It's if the threshold has been reached, and the threshold.
No, but I'm just asking first: is there a threshold?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
I mean, as I said, if the rule of law is no longer working, if minority rights, protection of minority rights has been abolished, if opposing parties, like the Democrats, for instance, had to dissolve, had to, give up their fight, if there is no longer a political opposition, and then this is, of course,
Joan, allow then Joan to answer the same question. In principle, does that threshold exist?
I agree completely with what your esteemed historian has just shared with you. Mm-hmm. I think there is a threshold, but I think it is so extreme that even with all of the depredations going on in our country, I don't think we will get to that point.
So you, as a thought leader, if somebody called you, I know you take a lot of calls on your program, if somebody called you and said, when is that point reached? What is the signal that that point has been reached? What would it be?
Well, I have a wide range of callers, and some would tell you that we've already reached that point, but I don't agree with that. I believe that the benchmarks that Arndt gave are absolutely correct. I don't think we'll get there. And even in Minneapolis, even in Minnesota, with the blatant execution of 2 people, I don't think that justifies violent protest in Minnesota.
Okay, and I'm guessing, Arndt, you have largely the same opinion, even if it is difficult to pinpoint that threshold. You do not think it has been reached, in the US at least.
No, it has not been reached, but we have to watch it. This is my argument. We have to watch it, and recent events have demonstrated that we are approaching it. So we have to keep an eye on this, but we can still prevent this, and so it's deeply concerning. It's worrying, but it has not been reached according to my definition. Rule of law, repression, and of political opponents. I mean, we still have the Democrats. We still have, at least to some extent, rule of law. So we still have some protection of minorities. I mean, people stand up in order to protect minorities. So it's deeply concerning. What is most concerning to me is this deep political polarization and this kind of an opportunism to Trump's policies, because
sure, I agree, and it's very notable. People who have spoken out against some of the things he did are now falling in line with this. Mark Rubio and Ted Cruz are notable examples of that. But I guess my follow-up question to that if that threshold exists where morally it is justified to either commit violence or to take other extra-legal actions against a growing fascist or a growing authoritarian regime, isn't there a problem with that? Because once you get to that point, that resistance is either very ineffective or maybe futile, aren't?
I think there are many problems with that, because, you're right, it may be futile, but still, I mean, will be some people to stand up.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. I mean, if the trade unions had called for a general strike in February 1933, which they considered, there would have been support and there would have been a chance to topple Hitler. I mean, Hitler, in his first phase of rule, was not a strong dictator, and so there would have been a chance. but the trade unions missed it, partly because they thought, against the backdrop of unemployment, workers it would be hard to mobilize people.
Sure.
This is always a problem. But in my view, they should have made the step and tried their utmost to prevent it. And it would have been possible, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So, but there has to be a strong leader opposing the majority leader, and we need people who want to get mobilized, and we need a clear message, and it has to be done very early.
One question which I will put to Joan, despite us having a very eminent historian on the line, I will play an amateur historian. It's very notable that the second, in an authoritarian state or organization, the second leader tends to be the most dangerous one. People have given the example of L. Ron Hubbard and his successor in Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard was maybe a figure of fun. It became a much more sinister organization under that second leader. Franco in Spain took over from the original dictator whose name escapes me. Hitler had a failed putsch in Munich in the late 1920s and spent some time in prison and came back as a much more dangerous leader. Do you think, Joan, that Trump too counts as that second attempt, or that a successor to Trump, perhaps J.D. Vance, would be more dangerous?
I can't see how anybody would be more dangerous than Trump too. Steve Bannon, one of his right-hand guys, said during Trump's first term, if Trump ever gets reelected, he said this country will not recognize itself. He will do so much damage. And that's exactly what's come to pass. And J.D. Vance is an empty sock puppet. He is whatever Peter Thiel, his billionaire buddy, tells him to be. So he's an unknown quantity. He absolutely is. Could he be more dangerous than Trump? Possibly, but I don't think so, because I think he's smarter than Trump, and he sees the things that Trump has done that have turned people off, and he would try to do away with that or soften it. That's my take on it. But I don't see, when you've got a president who doesn't care about Congress, who doesn't care about the courts, who doesn't even care about actually passing laws, just does everything by executive order and breaks all the ethics and breaks all the norms and breaks all the rules. How can it get worse than that, William?
Answer that question, Arnd.
Yes, I mean,
I think it can get worse, can't it?
Yes, I do agree. I mean, first, if you look at the history of the new right movements, I mean, there is place for just one leader. Mm-hmm. And if there is a second, contestant, somebody contesting somebody else's leadership, there is factionalism. I mean, the history of the new right,
successor, the second generation being more dangerous is what I'm getting.
Yeah, maybe. But my second point, mm-hmm. If you look at Trump's government, I mean, it's supported by, it has a heterogeneous followers and supporters. If you look at the people who have supported Trump, I mean, we have the MAGA movement on the one hand, very nationalistic, and on the other hand, we have the tech industrialists, Zuckerberg and so on. They are very internationalistic, and so I think I do see cracks, and the only person who bridges the gulf between Trump's followers is Trump himself. So these movements need a charismatic leader. And is Vance really a charismatic leader? I have some doubts.
Arnd, he's been described as having the personality of a wooden chair.
To finish, very quickly to both of you, Arnd first, is there a way back? Do you think that the US can go back to being a largely democratic liberal democracy?
Sure. There's still a chance. Of course, it depends on the following months, and it depends on the midterm elections. I mean, there are still, I think 10 months to go. It's open. I think it's very contingent So, I mean, Democrats have to do their utmost to win these midterm elections and to win back Congress, at least. I don't know. Yes, there is still a chance. I mean, the midterm elections will tell us a lot on America's path. Yes, there's a chance, but it's up to
Joan, same question to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we will retake our country, and I think we will move it forward. I think the pendulum is going to swing in the other direction. I think once we've established some kind of sanity, people are going to want, let's give back rights to women and minorities, and let's remember to promote them, and let's not erase American history and rewrite it in a white fashion. I think we are going to come back and be better than we were before.
Joan Esposito, afternoon presenter on WCPT Chicago's Progressive Talk Radio, and Arnd Bauerkämper, adjunct professor of modern history at the Freie Universität in Berlin. Both, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Joan.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. It covers the cost of keeping the podcast going, and if you could throw in a couple of euro once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/Here's How. That link is on the website. Also there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.